So, we're going to start our Elements of Handicapping series for the Kentucky Derby, and this is an evaluation of the 2024 Kentucky Derby field contenders utilizing the four corners of race handicapping: form, class, speed, and pace. And we'll begin with part one, which is form, the evaluation of each contender's performance to date and how it will impact their run in the Kentucky Derby. And very important to note is that these are segmented, but one may be a little more significant than the other. But also, the key is to put them all together and don't necessarily just say because a horse is outstanding in one category and maybe not so great in the others, that we include them. We have to take it from the overall of all four elements. So that's really important to make sure we understand that going in, and I think you do. But I think that'll help more putting together your contenders and pretenders if you consider the overall as opposed to just one particular aspect. So in our form evaluation, we're going to take a look at their Derby preps, and it'll be how they broke, the break, the trip they got, the pace of the race shape, how they finished, the quality, overall quality of the race, and then if there's progression or regression. And that's obviously a very key aspect of form evaluation. So we've developed a form rating system, and it's different than last year. We used letter grades, and I think this one is more quantitative and gives us a better idea of what the horses are looking like. And just for reference, I kind of got this from Vince Lombardi. Those of you who know who he is, the Hall of Fame coach for the Packers, he used to have a grading system for each play, and average was 0, and basically what it meant was you did your job. -2 is you didn't do your job, and then +2 would be you did it above average. So, and that's a little augmentation for me. But so if a horse ran the race we expected, or pretty much, ran an average race, then it would be 0. If they're above average, it would be +1. If they ran an outstanding race, it would be a +2. Below average, -1. Awful, meaning it just didn't factor at all and was just not a race that helps this horse moving towards the Derby. We would call it a -2. And we'll do this for each individual horse. So we'll start with Fierceness, and obviously this is one that we're all really important. We're really focusing on what to do with Fierceness. Obviously, it's a big issue, and his form is really the key. And the reason why we have so many problems with him. Now, we're only going to take the 3-year-old races, and we'll look at the Holy Bull. Now, you could call this a -2. I wouldn't have any problem if anybody wanted to downgrade it a little further. But the reason we put it at -1 is because he did finish third, and he did show a little something in that middle move in particular. But obviously, it was below standard from what we know Fierceness can do. So I'm giving it a -1. Obviously, the Florida Derby was outstanding, so that's a +2. And this should give us a good indication of the criterion for the rest of the horses. So in total, we add the two together, Fierceness gets a +1, which is a little above average. Now, he's mercurial, as we know, so he could run a +2 in the Derby. He could run a -2. But I think overall, this year, he's run a little bit above average if you throw the Holy Bull into consideration. However, you could also, and again, if you want to use my criterion, I wouldn't blame you at all if you put Fierceness at a 0, because good race, bad race. Next is Sierra Leone, and obviously this is another horse that we're really high on. We really want to drill down on him very specifically, and we'll take a look at his races. And the Risen Star, I thought he ran an excellent race. He closed into a slow pace, and it was his first start at 3, so an outstanding race. He gets a +2. The Bluegrass Stakes, I thought he ran a good race. The only reason he gets a +1 as opposed to a +2 is that he did have pace to run to. And so it wasn't certainly an above average race. There's no question about that. I just didn't think it was quite as impressive as the Risen Star because he did have pace to run to, and being a late runner, certainly that's kind of a dream scenario. So going against the grain in the Risen Star, that's how he gets a +2. So he's at a +3 going into the Derby. Catching Freedom is certainly another one that we want to really drill down on, and he has been a horse that has just gotten better with every single race. He's been green early on, but he appears to have worked it out. He's running straight, as he did in the Louisiana Derby, and he's improving with all his fractions. So this is a horse definitely on the rise that we're excited about. And we'll take a look at the Smarty Jones. I'm giving him a 0 because of all the greenness. He did win the race, that's true. But was it above average? It would be if it wasn't for all the greenness, the bobbling, the uneven pattern, and the failure to change leads properly or on time. So for that, he gets a 0. Showed improvement, obviously, in the Risen Star, ran a better race, but it still was hampered a bit by his greenness, and I do think it cost him the race. But speed figure wise, pace figure wise, he improved off the Smarty Jones, so he gets a +1. The Louisiana Derby, I think he put it all together. He ran a solid race. He changed leads. He didn't have any greenness per se. He certainly is a horse that looks to be maturing, and he ran a very solid race. His pace fractions were excellent. So for that, he gets a +2. So this is a horse you can see is progressing steadily, and I think is ready to run a peak effort in the Derby, +3. Honor Marie is another closer, and who hasn't had, has only had 2 preps this year, and we'll take a look at him. You see the Risen Star, he's going to get a -1, and it's not a bad -1 though, because he is a closer. It was his debut at 3, and we have seen with this horse that he does progress with each race. So he gets better as he moves along. So that's why he gets a -1, because it was a below average race. He started putting it together late, but the break and getting out of the gate and languishing a little bit early on gives him a -1. The Louisiana Derby, I thought he ran equally as good as Catching Freedom. I thought it was an outstanding race. He just wasn't quite as good as Catching Freedom, but he gets a +2 for that. So you put them together, and he's at +1, a little bit above average, and I think he's poised to run a big race in the Derby. Forever Young is obviously one that we the Japanese horse, the whole question is what was the quality of the races he ran in? And that's a big aspect of evaluating Forever Young. Now, we take a look at the Saudi Derby. He didn't break well. He didn't change leads, but he did win the race, and he did come from behind, and he really had to hustle to get up. So he ran big, despite not having his best effort, so he gets a +1 because it was a little bit above average. The UAE Derby, I thought he was an excellent race. I thought he did everything right, and carried wide all the way around and closed into a speed-favoring track. So for that, he gets a +2. So Forever Young is at a +3, and, taking another step would put him right in the mix. Stronghold has been, the quality of his races has not been good as far as the class of races, who he's running against. The Santa Anita Derby, he ran a good race. You could see 6 starts, 3 wins, 3 seconds. He's a model of consistency. I just didn't think he ran against a whole lot. So for that, the Sunland Derby, I'm giving him a 0 because who did he beat? He really didn't beat very much, and I don't think it was a real test for him, so he gets average, even though he won the race. Santa Anita Derby, he gets a +1 because he did have to duel extensively with imagination, and he did show some grit to finish out. But the quality of the race, the overall class, I didn't think was that terribly great. So for that, he gets a +1. I think this horse is a model of consistency. Not sure he's fast enough, and that's really the big issue with Stronghold. Sorry about that. We look at Resilience, And this is one that has been improving to a degree. The Risen Star, I thought he ran for his first stakes effort was a pretty good race. Now, he gets a 0 because he didn't really have enough to factor significantly late, but he did hang in there. So for that, he gets an average race. It was a 0. The Wood Memorial was an improved effort from a running standpoint. Again, don't know how much he beat. Quality of the race is a little suspect. So in that respect, he's very similar to Stronghold. So he gets a +1. But I think this one is improving. And perhaps he has another step forward. He could be another Rocket Can where he's plateauing. He's going to go either way with it, but I think this horse has a lot of class. He's maybe a little classier than Rocket Cannon. Maybe he's got another step forward, and not overly certain. Then we come to Dornoch, and this one is been just, to me, has been a pretty big disappointment this year. His 2 races, I did not like the Fountain of Youth, and the Bluegrass was even worse. So obviously, the Fountain of Youth, I'm going to give him a -1. I would rather give him a -2, but he did win the race, and he won on the front end, which I think is the best way for him to run. But who did he beat? Not very much, and he didn't put that field away. So it would probably be a 0 if he didn't run against such a poor quality of field. And then so that he gets a -1 for that, because we've seen that this horse can run better than that, potentially. The Bluegrass Stakes is a -2 because he didn't do anything right in that race at all. They can't rate him. He didn't compete. When asked, he really didn't have very much. So I think Dornoch is coming into the Derby in incredibly bad form. And he just has maturity issues. I keep harping on it, and I'll say it again. I keep looking at that picture, I'll back it up to show you again, and look where he's looking. He's not looking at the finish line. He's looking out to the stands. So I think this horse is very green, and I just don't like his form for that. That's a big problem I have with this horse. And again, I'll say it, I've said it a million times, but Danny Gargan said he waits for horses, and I just don't like hearing that from a trainer. And so to me, I'm really not very high on Dornoch at all for the Derby. Track Phantom has been a model of consistency. We know what he does. He goes to the lead, and he's just going to try to lull him to sleep and hang on. He's very one-paced, and we look at his starts, and the Lecomte, I'm giving him a 0 because he did what he was supposed to do. It was an average effort. I wouldn't call it outstanding. Risen Star, same thing. Pretty much ran the same race, except he run down by Sierra Leone, set slow fractions, and just tried to lull him to sleep, and he pretty much did. But again, Sierra Leone is a much better horse in my opinion, and he was able to overcome it. Louisiana Derby, I thought he showed some grit to hang in there. He obviously was out of his element because he had to run a little quicker, and he faced pressure, and he buckled in the stretch. Still hung on for 4, so he gets a -1 instead of a -2 because he did keep on. Obviously, it wasn't good enough, though. Just a touch. We've only got a couple races really significantly over the course of his career. He's only had 3 starts, and he ran in the Gotham against not very much, and for that he got second. But I'm giving him a 0 because the field wasn't very much, and he did close in to win it, but he did have a chance to win it, and he wasn't able to, so he gets a 0. Bluegrass was an above-average race. He was running against hot fractions in that race, but one thing about it is if you go back and watch that race, he took command, he took the lead in the stretch, but he looked like he stopped running until Sierra Leone came up alongside him, and then he started running again. It's a tiny little thing, but it means a lot, and it may speak to his maturity. This is a good horse. He is certainly capable of running another good one, especially with Brad Cox as his trainer. But I just wouldn't call that a +2 outstanding effort for that little thing in the stretch. That's the only limitation I have, and it may be nitpicking, but I think when you consider the pace fractions as well, Just a Touch, I thought, was a little bit above average, but not an outstanding effort. Just Steel has run a lot. We know this. For the coach, and coach likes to run him. He's got 11 starts. This one has shown competitiveness. He's shown grit. He's been unlucky in his post positions quite a bit. So certainly that is going to impact the kind of form ratings he gets. The Southwest Stakes, I thought he ran a really good race. He just wasn't as good as Mystic Dan in the mud. That's really what it came down to. I thought it was an above average effort, and but for Mystic Dan, he wins the race. The Rebel Stakes, he was compromised by being wide, and it was his second consecutive race wide, so he's done a lot of running. And for that, I'm going to give him a -1 because he didn't have much left in the stretch. It was understandable, though. So we maybe can upgrade that to a 0, but the fact that he just didn't finish well, he has to get a -1. Arkansas Derby, I thought he ran a very good race. A very good race. Would I call it outstanding? No, because the speed figures aren't quite up to par with, let's say, Sierra Leone or Fierceness, but it was an above-average race. So you put them all together, and he's at a +1, little bit above average. I still think this horse is a cut below the very best, but he looks to be coming into the race in pretty good form. Not sure about a 1.25 miles, but if we're just looking at form, he's a little bit above average, so that's a +1. West Saratoga is put together a couple of good efforts, and I do have some thoughts that this is a horse that is improving, but is he, he hasn't demonstrated that he can necessarily compete with the top horses, but he could be useful because I do think he's on an upward trend. If we look at the Sam F. Davis, he gets a -1 primarily because that field just wasn't very much. And those Tampa races just, to me, aren't very telling at all. And it was a grade 3, and it was probably more like an ungraded stakes type of company. And he had an okay race, but he could have done better, I thought. So he gets a -1, a little bit below average. The Jeff Ruby Stakes, I thought he ran a good race. He got a solid second. It was above average from what he normally runs. So this is a horse who is perhaps on a progression forward. I don't think it's good enough, but for form purposes, he's at 0, which is about average. Domestic Product has run in Florida, and he hasn't faced very much in either the Tampa Derby or the Holy Bull. And you look, and I'm giving him 0s for both. Yes, he won the Tampa Derby, that's true, but that was such a slow-paced race, as was the Holy Bull. So that's 2 races where he hasn't had to run very much on the front early on. So obviously he's going to have plenty in the tank left, particularly for the Tampa Derby. And they seem to be keeping him further back. And I just don't like what I'm seeing from him. But they were average efforts, and neither one of them is going to win the Kentucky Derby, and I don't even think he's going to factor at all, and I do have questions of whether he can get the distance. So for me, he's 0. He's an average, but, the Tampa Derby, if the pace hadn't been so glacially slow, he probably would have got a -1. I don't know. I just don't like this horse coming into this race. So, but I will give him props in that he did place in the money for both races, but I didn't think either of them was very much, so he gets a 0. Mystic Dan is another mercurial sort. We know that the Southwest Stakes was huge in the mud. Came back in the Arkansas Derby, and he ran a credible third, I suppose you could call it. The Smarty Jones Stakes, I didn't think he ran a good race at all, and I didn't like him at all going into the Southwest based upon that, particularly with his pedigree, and he got a -1. It was a substandard effort. Obviously, the Southwest Stakes, he ran huge. He gets a +2, but I'm putting an asterisk by it because it was in the mud. And in the Arkansas Derby, I thought he ran an average race to get a 3, get third, so he gets a 0. So you put it all together. He's a little bit above average. He does have good speed. Whether or not he can take it all the way, being by Golden Sense, that's a big question mark. But form-wise, I think he's coming in the race in pretty decent form. Whether it'll be good enough, highly suspect. Society Man has been... he looks like the light bulb is going off, but getting a second in the Wood Memorial, I don't know how much we can say about that race. Obviously, in the Withers, he didn't do a step of running. That's a big-time -2. If I could make it a -10, I would. It was a terrible race. He didn't do anything right at all. He didn't feel like running. The Wood Memorial, he showed marked improvement. He was up closer to the pace, and he ran a very solid second. And he was getting the resilience in the stretch. But, again, who are you running against? The quality of the field, not terribly good. He did run huge at 106-1. But overall, I think he's below average, and consequently, he ends up at a -1, and I think that's a good place for him. He may run better in the Derby. He may keep running when a lot of them are backing up. That's something to consider. We'll get into that when we get into class and pace and speed. But form-wise, I think he's just not as good as he's a cut below, maybe 2 cuts below the very best. Encino is a horse I've liked since that Battaglia, and the fact that Epic Ride came back in the Bluegrass and ran as well as he did, I think that upgrades Encino. The fact that he has had, I'm sorry, that should be the Lexington, I apologize. But we look at his 2 races, and the Battaglia, I thought he ran an above-average effort. Quality of the field is a bit of a question mark, so rather than a +2, he gets a +1, mainly because of the field. And the Lexington Stakes, again, quality of the field. DeWine Stewart, really nice horse. Liberal Arts didn't run a step. I have never been high on Hades, so the quality of that field limits the win in the Lexington from a +2 to a +1 because it was an above-average effort. I love the fact that he was able to change running styles based upon the bias of the track to win on the lead. So he gets a +2 because he's appearing to be a quality horse, but I need to see him step it up against better competition. Grand Mo the First has been in Florida, and the Florida 3-year-olds just aren't very good this year. Both races, Tampa Derby and the Florida Derby, I thought the fields were not very good. He got third in both. Okay, great. Tampa Derby, again, screwy race. He gets a 0 because he was in the mix at the end, but again, I don't think that's saying much. In the Florida Derby, he was an extremely distant third. He really didn't factor in the race at all, and given the quality of the field, save for Fierceness, he gets a -1 because I thought it was a below-average effort, and I think he's a cut or 2 below. I don't like him in the Derby at all. Catalytic, we've really only got one race to consider, and that's the Florida Derby. It was his first effort around 2 turns. I thought he ran huge. He gets an above-average rating of +1 because obviously it wasn't outstanding because he didn't beat Fierceness. He did beat the rest of what is a very mediocre field, so it's an above-average effort. Whether he can build on it, I think is highly questionable, so I'm not sure about progression. I think he's probably due for a bounce, but for the Florida Derby, +1. Common Defense, we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly with this one. He's had 3 preps, and he is a horse I think is getting better, to be sure. Just, again, Kenny McPeace, you just don't know what you're going to get. He is on the also eligible list. I have a feeling he's going to draw in, though. Excuse me. And so we have 3 preps to look at. The Southwest Stakes, I thought he would run a lot better than he did, and he did not. He gets him about -1 because I thought it was just a below-average effort. The Rebel Stakes, I thought he ran an excellent race. Ran very well, but Timberlake has turned out to be not what we thought he was. So for that, rather than a +2, he would get a +1 because it was an above-average effort, and he did have a chance to win the race. The Louisiana Derby, I thought he was pretty good up near the pace for a while. He served the purpose of softening up Track Phantom. But in all things considered, I thought it was just an average race because he weakened in the stretch and wasn't more prominent later. T.O. Password, we only got one race to deal with, and it was the Fukurio Stakes. I have heard some Japanese experts, people, talking about this horse, and they're not very high on him. I did not like the finish in this race at all. He was begging for the finish line against what was probably not the greatest of field because nobody who was rating behind him, could match him in the stretch. Nobody could get to him. He may be able to continue to run, but I thought that was a below average effort because, again, he didn't look like he had much in the tank crossing the finish line, and I don't think the field was terribly good, so he gets a -1. So, if we take a look at form, we see that our top three are Sierra Leone, Catching Freedom, and Forever Young, and that shouldn't be a surprise to us at all. They've all are doing what they're supposed to do, and they're doing so in a way that tells you they are progressing and ready to run another big race. So that's you'd have to be excited about those three. Encino is a horse that I think is a sleeper, and if he gets in, if they do run him, I think is very dangerous, particularly since he has now displayed an effort to run up and near the pace, and that tactically could put him in very good position. Fierceness, which one's going to show up? Obviously, there's no big surprise about him. Honor Marie, I think, is one to watch, that he is coming into the race in very good form. And then we have, the plus ones are horses that I think are doing better, but maybe they're not quite as, you can't be quite as confident about their form coming into the race. So it's kind of a judgment call. And when we look at the other elements, I think we'll be able to sort them out a little better. But some of them, I think, like Stronghold is one that, borderline, very borderline. Resilience, just a touch. For me, those are three horses that are kind of borderline. Catalytic, probably towards the toss end. And Mystic Dan is another one that's kind of borderline. The zeros are ones that, they're pretty much doing what they can do, but they're average. They're not above average. And that's, for that reason, they're, probably not real strong contenders. And then we have the minuses. Those are all horses that the form just isn't very good. And with the only one that I might consider is Society Man. And maybe when we look at some of the other aspects, we may reevaluate. Right now, just on a form basis, I don't know. He looked kind of like a toss to me. And then the bottom three, Grand Mo the first, Tio Password, and Dornoch, I think are pretty easy tosses in my opinion. Dornoch in particular, I just don't like anything I'm seeing about him coming into the Derby. So that's part one. We will continue with class, speed, and pace. We've already seen some of the pace numbers, but we're going to put it all together and compare them to get a better feel for who's looking the strongest in that regard. But this is just the first part. Again, I want to stress that. But based upon form, the top three there look pretty good, and I think Encino is a really dangerous sleeper as well as Honor Marie.